So today we have less than an hour to talk about to wrap up chapter 6. So let me try to do that. Today we have the spring ritual, which is what inspired the question in the first place. What is the spring ritual? How is it different from the daily ritual, etc. So that's the reason why we have a short meeting. We're going to have to end pretty much everything that we talk about at around 11:25 local time. So we have perhaps half an hour more to get through the topics for today. I want to remind everyone that next Sunday there isn't going to be an online meeting, and that's because there's a Chinese language Tao conference to take place here at this temple. So I'm not going to be here. Anyone is welcome to attend. So if you guys want to show up, that's totally fine. In the past, for Tao conferences of this nature, they have set up simultaneous Chinese to English translation, and this has been pretty helpful for the people that attend but cannot understand Chinese. As far as I know, there are no such plans that have been coordinated for next Sunday. So I won't be able to guarantee that there's going to be someone on hand to translate from Chinese to English. So if you do want to show up, you may be just sitting through a lot of Chinese that you may not be able to really figure out. You can still look at the hand gestures and the facial expressions. So anyhow, moving on, and because of that, so let me talk about the overview. Here's what I'll try to do today, continuing from last Sunday, is that number one, we'll quickly wrap up the translation review from last Sunday. That was the very last part of our meeting from last Sunday. So I'll just touch on that. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we have some truly important stuff to talk about. Important because I think everybody knows that the biggest news in the land, indeed around the world, is the Boston bombing incident, and also the very quick resolution of that. Nevertheless, this has been a very tragic event, so I want to address this topic face on from a Tao perspective. So a couple of things about that. Death and tragedy, basically, are the two things. So you guys already know that in chapter 6, it talks about how the valley spirits, the spirit of the valley, is undying, or that it goes on forever. So it actually touches death. So I want to use that as the springboard to talk about the Tao perspective on death. In the past, and what I read most often in English literature about the Tao is that the Tao doesn't say one way or the other on the afterlife, that the original authentic Tao teachings does not address what happens in the hereafter. So that's what I thought too. In my book, The Tao of Daily Life, there is a short chapter called The Crying Princess. It's from Zhuangzi. Okay, so that story addresses the topic of death. So in the explanation for that, my message in that book was mostly what I said just now, which is that, well, nobody really knows anything about death, and therefore it doesn't make sense for us to be afraid of it. We are just being afraid of the unknown. Okay, so that part is still true. That part doesn't change. What I did not know at the time, because I was relatively new in the Tao, had not learned into any great depth of detail, was that in reality, the Tao teachings really do address the issue of the afterlife. It is never stated explicitly, but the signs are all there. And I will point those out one by one. In that story that I mentioned, The Crying Princess, a story by Zhuangzi, the idea behind the story is that, there was this princess in the days of the Warring States, that she was about to be married off to a king in a neighboring state. And she didn't know the king, she didn't know what kind of person he was. She loved her life as a single girl. She loved her existence. She didn't want to get married, so she resisted with all her might. Okay, so this is a metaphor. This means fear of the unknown. The marriage is like death. We are like the princess. We are so afraid of death because we don't know anything about it. She was afraid of marriage because she didn't know anything about the king. Now, the story goes on that after she got married, she got used to life in this other kingdom, and she discovered that it was better than anything she could have imagined before. Then she was regretting, ashamed that she was so out of ignorance, so afraid of death. So the actual story contains a pretty strong hint that, hey, listen, the afterlife, it can actually be a lot better than the existence that we have right now. Okay? So it's indirectly referencing heaven. That completely went over my head the first time I studied that story. But now that I understand it a little bit more and I understand what Zhuangzi was trying to say, I have a longer version of it. I have a longer version, a longer treatment of the story in a new book that will be coming out. And I think it's an important topic because it's life and death is the deepest, the most important, most meaningful question that we have in this lifetime. Now, another story from Zhuangzi is exactly the same way, that it talks about death. And then you think that, oh, well, it doesn't say anything about the afterlife one way or the other. But then toward the very end of the story, no, it's exactly the same. Zhuangzi throws in strong hints about the hereafter. Now remember, 2,500 years ago, at the time that Zhuangzi lived, there was not yet any concept from the Buddhist tradition on reincarnation. Reincarnation is a Hindu concept that went into Buddhism, and then from Buddhism went into China. So now most Chinese people are familiar with that, and many believe in reincarnation, but 2,500 years ago, that was a time when the original founder of Buddhism was just being born, was just teaching his philosophy of life. So it hadn't gone into China yet. Chinese people at that time had no idea what Hinduism or Buddhism were all about. And therefore, there's no mention of reincarnation in the Tao teachings from that time either. But there was at least a very strong suspicion that life does not end with death, that we all go on. And I'll explain. I'll get into that in more detail. Obviously, a very important topic there. Then, speaking of the Boston bombing event, it's a very tragic event. I want to talk specifically on the Tao perspective on that. How do we handle it? And the way that we typically handle it is with a lot of cliches, with a lot of platitude. We see comfort in one another and so forth. So I hope to be a little bit different from that. I hope to speak from the Tao perspective and elevate it to another level. So for today, logistics. For the people who are here today, this will come up again at the very end of our talk today. But basically, the Tao conference next Sunday, there's going to be a lot of masters at the temple who will, and also masters from other temples who will be coming today to have a meeting about this Tao conference coming up next Sunday. So they'll be taking up the conference room for that meeting, which we usually gather. That's where we usually are for lunch. So they've asked that we not use that room for lunch today. So probably those of us who are here will just use like the main hall for lunch. We'll use a different place for lunch. So that's the logistics for today. I'll repeat this at the end of our meeting. Okay. This part I'm going to do next time because it is not as important as the message, as the main message today. I want to recap the summary for everybody from last time. So this is the last slide from last Sunday. So the first thing that I asked you to remember was the spirit of the valley. Use the mental image of the valley to remind yourself to be open, receptive, tolerant, and nurturing. Now, the spirit of the valley is a way to refer to the emptiness that is the essence of the Tao. So the valley is like a container. It's like a very large cup. The valley has open spaces. That's like the emptiness inside the cup. That emptiness is a metaphor in speaking of the void that represents the Tao itself. So that was from last time, and then we also talked a little bit about the divine, the sacred feminine. But today, I want to focus on these two. But because that's just as important. So essence of the Tao, okay, spirit of the valley, cool. Now, let's talk about these two characters. This means no, this means to die or death. No death. No undying is a term that I used previously. I want to focus on this. So in the next slide, you'll see simply those two characters highlighted or circled, as the case may be. So I want to talk about probably the best way to talk about the Tao perspective on death is to once again use Zhuangzi. So last time, if you guys recall, I provided you with the very last teaching from Zhuangzi. This was Zhuangzi on his deathbed, basically arguing with his disciples on how to bury him, how to have a funeral for him, right? So true to his nature, Zhuangzi wanted to be funny even on his deathbed. He wanted to be unconventional, and he wanted to inspire his students to think differently about life. So that was a cool story, and the message of the story was, don't be so attached about that. And if you guys recall, it was in connection with the story, with the chapter, the previous chapter of the Tao Te Ching on the straw dogs. The straw dogs symbolizing all of us. When the ritual is over, they are discarded, they are burned, just like when the ritual of life is over, our physical bodies are simply discarded. Now, let me address this topic of undying using again Zhuangzi, because there was another brush with mortality from Zhuangzi way before his teaching on his deathbed. So what happened is that, Zhuangzi had been married for many years, had a family for many, many decades. And his wife passed away before he did. So that was his first brush, significant brush with mortality from someone very close to him. So the story is about Zhuangzi and his friend. Zhuangzi had a friend who was also a very well-known scholar at the time, Huizi. So remember, Zi means master. Zhuang is the surname, so Zhuangzi, literally master Zhuang. Huizi, literally master Hui. So Zhuangzi and Huizi were lifelong friends, and they constantly discussed the Tao, life. They would have debates back and forth. They have a lot of fun with one another. People often will say that, well, they were frenemies. They were friends who were also enemies. They were rivals. But in fact, the two men enjoyed a very close friendship. They enjoy one another's company, even when they're debating with one another, which can get pointed sometimes. Even then, it never damaged their friendship in the least. They always knew that it was not about personal things; it was about the Tao. So Huizi, the good friend, had also known Zhuangzi's wife for many, many years. As long as they've been together, he's known her, and was also a very good friend of hers. And therefore, having known the couple all these years, as soon as he heard the news that she had passed away, she felt that it was only right and proper for him to pay Zhuangzi a visit. Why? Well, it was to look after his friend, make sure he was okay in his time of need, and also to pay his final respects to the wife of Zhuangzi. So that makes perfect sense. Huizi was a very proper gentleman. Okay, he had reached a high level of he had a high level position within the government. Was very well respected. Was very proper. Was a very proper gentleman. So when he showed up, he went to Zhuangzi's residence, and he looked around. He found Zhuangzi. he was not exactly prepared for what he saw. Zhuangzi was basically sitting on the ground singing to himself. He did not look like a man who was grieving. Instead, his demeanor was that he was kind of enjoying the music, singing to himself, lost in the enjoyment of the music. Well, Huizi thought, this is outrageous. Your wife just died. What are you doing? He knew that he should take steps right away to stop this outrageous behavior. So he went up to Zhuangzi, shook him up a little bit. What are you doing? What is wrong with you? Listen, your wife, she's been with you all these years. She raised a family with you, all these decades. Now that she's gone, shouldn't you be at least a little bit sad? Shouldn't you shed at least a few tears? What are you doing? You're singing. This is not proper. So Zhuangzi is like, oh, wow, okay, what's going on? And recognizes his friend. And so Zhuangzi says, okay, I understand your concern, my friend, but everything is fine. So Zhuangzi's, the expression that Zhuangzi had was one of calmness, whereas for Huizi, Huizi was very emotional. So Huizi says, basically that, look, the fact is, your wife just lost her life, okay? So you need to act like that. You need to act like your wife has just lost her life. So Huizi says, well, initially, when she passed away, I was overcome with sadness and grief. How could I not be? But then I thought about it some more, and then I realized that she actually hadn't lost anything. You say that she lost her life, but I thought about it and I realized that, this life that you say she has lost, it was never actually hers to begin with. That before she was born, it wasn't, this is not a life that belonged to her, because think about all the time before she was born, she didn't have a life. She didn't have life, just like all of us we weren't alive before we were born. So this life that you say she has lost, it never was hers to begin with. And now it's not hers again. So nothing has really changed fundamentally. She lost a life that was not hers to begin with. Now, Huizi had to admit that he never thought of it that way. He never thought of death that way, because this applied to everybody. So think about it. Anyone dies, anyone losing his or her life. That's what we think conventionally, but did this person really lose anything that belonged to him or her? Well, think about all the time in the world. Let's say you are 25 years old. Now, 25 years ago, you weren't alive back then. 25 million years ago, you weren't alive. In fact, 14.5 billion years ago, when the universe started, you weren't alive. So from that time to 25 years ago, you weren't really alive during that time. So this life that you had, it was yours only temporarily. It wasn't yours permanently. Anyway, so did you really lose anything? It's like you gained something for a short time, and then it went away again. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So Huizi says, okay, well, I never thought of it that way. But, I have a big but. I still have this big objection. I don't like it. I don't like what you're doing. The fact remains that your wife had lived, and now she went from the living to now being dead. So there was a change from being alive to being dead. That isn't nothing. It's not like nothing occurred. Okay? Zhuangzi says, yes, that is true. What happened was a transformation. So Zhuangzi said, so prior to her birth, in a state between existence and non-existence. There was a transformation that gave rise to energy. That energy gave rise to manifestation, from no existence to having no physical existence to having a physical existence. That manifestation transformed into a human body, which was her specific shape. Now, there's yet another transformation as she returns to that previous state. These transformations, these stages that you go through, everyone goes through that. It's happening all the time, everywhere. It is like the changing of season. Winter changing into spring, spring changing into summer, summer to autumn, back to winter again, back to spring again. So we're not particularly sad about one season changing into another. So if life and death are also a natural transformation, like the changing of season, then when I thought about that, I realized that it didn't make sense for me to cry my eyes out. So that is the story. Zhuangzi said, I will always miss my wife, but I don't need to lose myself in grief. So that is the Tao perspective on death. So there's several important elements that I want to make sure everyone is noticing. So like I mentioned, this is an important topic. So number one, whatever it is that is our source, whatever it is that we all came from, we give it the name the Tao because it seems to be the way of the cosmos for there to be rise, for there to be life arising all the time, everywhere, every kind of living thing, including us. We all come from the Tao. And the Tao can be characterized as a state between existence and non-existence because there seems to be nothing there. It's the spirit of the valley. It's empty, and yet everything comes from it. So it's literally bursting at the seams with possibilities waiting for manifestation. So that's the next one. Potentiality transforms into manifestation. So you, and now I'm addressing every single one of you, the uniqueness that is you, because there's nobody else out there quite like you. You are absolutely unique. Among the billions of human beings in the world, the untold billions that lived before and the untold billions that will come, you are absolutely unique. The uniqueness that is you transformed from potentiality to manifestation. And the fact, I hope you won't ask me to prove this because the fact that you're listening to me is proof that you have a manifestation in this material world, and therefore you can listen to this. Manifestation transforms into human life. Perhaps the manifestation could have taken on some other forms, but it was this particular type of manifestation that you took on. A very specific form. It's a form with your look, with your hair, with your skin color, your name, your identity, your mind, your memories. All of that. And you're going to carry on like this for a while, human life. But after a while, let's just say, I don't know, 70 years from now, 60, whatever that may be, at some point, the end comes for you, just like it does for everyone. So you make another transformation back to potentiality. Reversing back again, like the changing of seasons. So this is where I say Zhuangzi is always providing a very strong suggestion that it doesn't end. So for the princess, for the crying princess, after she was married, she enjoyed the good life at the palace of the king, okay, which is symbolic of heaven in the hereafter. When in this particular story, when Zhuangzi says it's like the changing of season, that's because the changing of season goes on. You know, when summer is over, that isn't the last summer because there's going to be another summer. Therefore, it is true that the Tao does address the afterlife, never explicitly, but it is always implicit. It's always there. If you open your eyes, you will see it. So what about the scholars and writers who say that the Tao doesn't talk about the afterlife at all? They're simply wrong. There's no other explanation. They don't really know enough about the Tao. That's the bottom line. And as I keep pointing out, you can't believe everything you read. A lot of it is bad information, wrong information, and that, by the way, is the reason why, at the very beginning, I wanted to quote Theodore Sturgeon. He's a famous writer, science fiction writer. He had said 90% of everything is crud. He didn't say that exactly. This was extracted from some writing that he did, where he talked about so many things in the world. 90% of that is crud. And then in the sentence later on, he said crap instead of crud. But the meaning is the same, that 90% of everything out there isn't really worthwhile. And crud is crud. This is what I say. This is not Ted Sturgeon saying this. This is what I say. Crud is crud, even if it happens to be popular. Some of the most popular books we have on the Tao are in fact crud. Crud is crud, even if it has the endorsement of someone with a fancy title. Many of the books that are out there that are popular do have endorsement from people with fancy titles, PhD, professor this, professor that, still crud. But I'm skipping the first part of it because that isn't important. The important thing is to focus on the Tao perspective on death and know that in ancient times, 2,500 years ago, it was already recognized that there isn't necessarily an end, that your life doesn't come to a stopping point just because you have died. The physical body has died. Today, with the knowledge that we have from science and technology, we can see the same truth in more ways than the ancients could. So for instance, we look at nature, we look at anything that happens in nature, and we notice 100% perfect preservation, conservation of everything. If something burns, it doesn't stop to exist. It's transformed into other things. If there's a forest fire, the trees that used to be in the forest are gone, but they continue on in some way. Part of the trees have been transformed into smoke and fire, heat, energy, light when the fire is burning. Other parts of the tree have been transformed into ashes. And those continue on to fertilize the forest for the next generation. Every molecule is accounted for. Nothing is wasted. Everything continues on, sometimes in a different form. This applies to absolutely everything that we see. So then the question has to be asked, what about human consciousness? If human consciousness comes to an absolute end, well, it'll be the only thing, the only exception out there. Why should it be an exception? There's no reason to believe that it is. Therefore, the concept is that we all continue on in some way. We don't know the hows and why, we don't have the details, and it's okay. We don't need to have all the details right now. Some of that is the limitation of our knowledge. But what I'm saying here is that you do not have to take this on faith. It just makes sense. So let's talk about a very difficult topic. Let's talk about death when there is a face associated with them. I hope you recognize these faces. When this event happened, I was at the office. I talked to a coworker. He had been checking online sources the entire day, trying to figure out the latest details. He said, initially, the photos and the videos that came in were low quality, were blurry. Okay, he was okay in the morning. In the afternoon, the high definition cameras, the video from that, the photos, the clear photos showing the real carnage, showing people's limbs blown off, bones protruding, blood everywhere. He said, Derek, I lost it. This is a grown man. He said, I cried like a baby. And the same was true, I suspect, for a lot of us. It was difficult to read about, to watch, to see. And then we learn more about the victims. These are the 3 people who lost their lives when the bombs went off. Richard Martin, 8-year-old boy. Crystal Campbell, 29-year-old girl. I know she's an adult, but she's so much younger than me. I call her a girl. 23-year-old girl, Lindsay Liu from mainland China. So these are the people that the more you learn about them, the more you think, why? Why would this happen to people like that? I mean, Richard Martin, adorable 8-year-old little boy, he's not like other 8-year-olds that I know. Most of the kids that I know that age are very self-centered. Richard was different. I mean, he was different from when he was a baby. He was always caring and compassionate of other people. This was the little boy that in school, if he sees that some other kid is being left out, he will be the one to go to that kid and say, hey, you want to join our group? He's always looking out for people like that, always sticking up for his friends, sticking up for other kids. I know kids like that when I was growing up, when I was getting picked on. Luckily, there were other kids like him who stuck up for me, and who said to the bullies, leave him alone. So that's the kind of little boy he was, and you can kind of tell just by looking at the photo. You can see that even at such a young age, the compassion coming through. So there's another photo of him, holding up a sign that he made himself, and it said, no more hurting people, peace. And it's the same with Crystal Campbell. I mean, these are great people. These are nice people. Crystal, this is she's someone that you can count on to be a true friend. If you need her there, she's there. Her grandmother says that when she underwent an operation, the grandma, she had lost her husband, grandfather, years ago. So Crystal went to live with her for 2 years just to be able to take care of her. Okay, well, you don't see everybody doing that nowadays. You don't see people doing that. You can kind of tell just by looking at her smile that this is a girl full of life, full of joy. In one blast of the bomb, she's no more. Think about it. Her body was blown to bits, literally. And Lindsay Liu, student from mainland China, she was going to school, studying her postgraduate degree. She had just passed an exam, very happy, she did well. And she had told her friends, her family, that since coming to the United States, she had fallen in love with Boston and the people of Boston. She had no idea that it would be the place that becomes her final resting place. It will be the place where her life ends. So we know that tragic events happen, especially tragic when it happens to people who are so young, so good, so full of promise. It could happen to any of us. So, for the family of the victims, when they heard about this, one particular family member was thinking, my goodness, how must the family feel? How must they be feeling? And then she finds out, oh, we are the family. That family is us. So how do we even approach that? Different people will handle it differently. Woody Allen, the famous actor, director, writer, he has said, half in jest, if there is a God, I hope he has a good excuse. How come it's always the great people? How come it's always the nice people who die young? People will handle it differently. So I want to present to you how the Tao handles it. I posted on Facebook today that the Tao of Joy, day 114, addresses that topic specifically. Even though this book was published more than a year ago and was written 2 or 3 years ago, when you read day 114, it's like it was written specifically for the Boston bombing tragedy. So I'm not going to read that entire day. Some of you already have that book. You can actually read that particular day online. I think you can find it if you do like the book search, a Google book search. You can find that particular page. I'll just summarize it for you. And we don't have a whole lot of time today anyway. So I'll just go ahead and summarize it for you, and then we'll have to end this meeting for the day. So remember the story that I just told you about Zhuangzi when his wife passed away. Remember what he said about the changing of seasons, this transformation for human beings from no existence to having an existence back to non-existence again. Keep in mind, death is not the end. There are no true termination points anywhere in nature, anywhere. Second point to remember, no one exists in isolation. Everyone is connected to everyone else. So, I want to mention the police officer who was shot to death by one of the suspects, Sean Collier. He also was a victim. The suspect himself was shot to death. He became his own victim. Now, what about all the people who didn't die from the blast but lost their limbs? Literally, their legs are gone, blown off. They're going to be living a life full of pain, physical pain. We're all connected to one another. No one is unaffected. And there is a reason for everything that happens. You have to find the reason. More than that, you have to find the why. You have to find your duty among all of that. So the very last point, also the most important, is your spiritual responsibility. Here, a spiritual responsibility is your ability to respond in a spiritual way. Your spiritual responsibility is your ability to respond in a spiritual way. The ability to frame the best possible response, to assign the meaning that will be empowering, that will be life-affirming. What is that going to be? For some people, it is hatred, it is anger. For other people, the response is different. The response is to cherish the life that is still out there, the people who are still around, that we haven't lost. And that brings me to the very last page, which is also the summary page. A short talk today, but I feel it is very important. So my homework assignment for everyone is the following. Contemplate the best response to tragedy. Is the best response hatred for the perpetrator? Well, for many people, that's the case. Is it hatred for the perpetrator's religion? Well, for many people, that's the case. But let me say that it isn't the religion that caused it. It was extremism. Same thing with the Oklahoma City bombing. Almost 200 people died in that bombing. And the commonality between that perpetrator and this perpetrator, different religions, same extremism. So let me say that among all the great traditions of the world, the teachings of the Tao is the one that will emphasize the undesirability, the negativity associated with extremes. I know that there are many religious traditions out there. Their whole purpose is to whip everyone into a frenzy every Sunday. Good for donations. Good for collecting donations. The Tao is going to tell you, no, that's an extreme. That is also an extreme. Avoid extremes. Peace, quietness, harmony, love for one another. So is the best response rage against an unjust fate? Like, how could this happen? How could this happen to such good people? That anger, or let the tragic events incapacitate you in grief. So let me tell everyone, I'm very familiar with number 2 and number 3 here. And that's because I lost my brother in a car accident more than 20 years ago. And so I can tell everyone that, yes, I definitely raged against an unjust fate. He was so good. He was the best among us. Why was he gone and not someone else? And I was completely incapacitated in grief, absolutely incapacitated. People who know me today will find that very hard to believe, but I wasn't good for anything. Those are not the best response to tragedy. Let's talk about the real Tao best response. Let it be a wake-up call. To do what? To become more spiritually attuned. That means to see that there's more to life than what we can perceive with our senses. To know that there's more than this world. A wake-up call to be reminded of the fragile beauty that is life. Wake-up call to embrace and cherish those people who are still with us. All of them. And lastly, draw strength and affirmation of life from it. So, that is my message for everyone. We ran over by about 10 minutes. I do apologize, but I felt that it was very important for us to talk about every single thing that we talked about today. So I want to thank you very much for hanging on with me, and I'd like to bring this meeting to a close with a meeting closing ritual. If everyone can follow me, please. 起立，面向火塘，持架3鞠躬，1鞠躬，再鞠躬，3鞠躬， 赐驾多一点传师一鞠躬，结班一鞠躬。Thank you, everybody.